Good morning, students. How are you all? Fine. Okay, very good. Dear students, now is the session of economics. And in this session, I am going to start the new chapter of macroeconomics, that is about short-term equilibrium of an economy. Okay, in the previous sessions we have discussed much about aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and different aspects of aggregate demand and aggregate supply we have done. And till now we have understood that there is equilibrium in the economy when money flow is equal to real flow. Since money flow implies expenditure of an economy and it is termed as aggregate demand, and since real flow implies availability of goods and services in terms of GDP or in terms of income generated or in terms of value added, therefore the real flow in fact is aggregate supply of an economy. So the short-term equilibrium of an economy is struck when aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. That means when money flow is equal to real flow. Okay, this is obviously clear to you all that the equilibrium of an economy takes place when aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Or already we know that aggregate demand is equal to C plus I whereas aggregate supply is equal to C plus S. So when equilibrium occurs, then C plus I is equal to C plus S, and if C plus I, that is aggregate demand, is equal to C plus S, that is aggregate supply, then I must be equal to S, where I is the investment and S is the saving. So if a part of income is not spent on consumption, or if aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, or if a part of income is saved, then through financial system this saving is converted into investment expenditure, and consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure both represent aggregate demand of an economy, whereas consumption and saving represent aggregate supply of an economy. And aggregate demand means the goods and services which people have planned to purchase at a given level of income. Therefore, you can also call it as ex ante demand. And aggregate supply means what producers have intended, what producers have planned to produce, or you can say it is ex ante supply, ex ante production. So if the planned production, if ex ante production is equal to planned expenditure, planned demand, or ex ante demand, then equilibrium is struck in the economy. Okay, already I've told you, if AD is equal to AS, that means plant expenditure is equal to plant income or plant output. Or if plant output is equal to plant expenditure, that means aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply, then savings must be equal to investment. This is the basic of the equilibrium of an economy. Now, if you represent this equilibrium of an economy graphically, then you will find that by keeping the level of employment along x-axis, level of income and employment along x-axis, and by keeping aggregate demand and aggregate supply along y-axis, you will find that aggregate supply curve is positively sloped, moving in upward direction from left to right, and aggregate demand starting from any other point of y-axis above the origin also is positively sloped, moving upward from left to right. A certain level comes where these two curves, I mean aggregate demand curve and aggregate supply curve, intersect each other, and the level of employment at which these two curves intersect each other is called equilibrium level of employment. And in the short run, employment is synonymous to income. So the point, the level where aggregate demand curve is intersecting aggregate supply curve will be called equilibrium level of income. Thus, in the economy, the equilibrium level of income and employment basically is determined by aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Okay, whenever these two are equal, the level of employment, the level of income is said to be determined. Okay, students, now let us discuss about the views of different scholars, different economists regarding equilibrium of an economy. But before that, let us understand, if AD and AS are not equal to each other, suppose AD is greater than AS, that means what? That implies what? That indicates what? That indicates that the people have planned more to demand than the availability, than the supply. And in this condition, when aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, the producers would inspire to produce more. They will increase investment till the equilibrium level is achieved. So, when aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply, then it will lead to increase in investment, that will further lead to increase in income and employment. Till what? Till the level equilibrium is achieved. And second condition, if aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then it means the plant production, the intended production is greater than the plant demand, the plant expenditure. And in this condition, when AS is greater than AD, the producers would intend to reduce investment till the equilibrium level is achieved. So if aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then the producers will reduce investment as a result of which the level of income and the level of employment will also decrease. Okay, so there may be two consequences of the two situations when the economy is not in equilibrium. But let us now discuss about the two different views given by different economists and scholars regarding short-term equilibrium of an economy. One view regarding equilibrium of the economy is called the classical view, given by the classical scholars, classical economists like J.B. Say, J.S. Mill, etc. They had a firm belief that supply creates its own demand, number one. Number two, there is always full employment in the economy due to flexibility in wage rate. They were also of the opinion that always there is equilibrium in the economy due to wage price flexibility, and in fact equilibrium of the economy takes place at the level of full employment in which aggregate supply curve is perfectly inelastic. This is the classical view. But the Great Depression of 1929 and 30 proved that it is not supply that creates its own demand, but it is demand that creates its own supply. So after this Great Depression, this view changed all over the world, and a revolution was brought up in economic science by John Maynard Keynes. So another view of short-term equilibrium of an economy has been given by James Keynes, who says that it is not supply but it is demand which creates its own supply. And in the short run, there is no flexibility in wage rate, therefore there is no adjustment of demand and supply of labor in the labor market, and the economy may be in the state of underemployment. Third, there cannot be permanent equilibrium of the economy due to wage price flexibility, but there may be unemployment in the economy. Until full employment in the economy is achieved, aggregate supply remains perfectly elastic. That means till the full employment level is achieved in the economy, aggregate supply has a tendency to be adjusted in accordance with the changes in aggregate demand. Thus, in Keynesian model, aggregate supply is a passive factor and aggregate demand is an active factor in determining the level of income and employment in the economy in the short term. So, according to Keynes, the equilibrium of an economy may be at the level of full employment, or maybe even before the level of full employment, or under the state of underemployment. So this is the basic difference between classical view and Keynesian view regarding equilibrium of the economy, that classicals believe that always there is equilibrium in the economy at full employment level due to wage price flexibility and because supply creates its own demand. But in fact, Keynes says that there is not always full employment in the economy, so there cannot be full employment equilibrium always. Rather, this equilibrium of aggregate demand and aggregate supply may take place even before the level of full employment. So till the full employment level is achieved, aggregate supply happens to be perfectly elastic, and as soon as the level of full employment is achieved, it becomes perfectly inelastic. Okay, so this is the basic difference between classical view of equilibrium and Keynesian view of equilibrium. Now, I hope that what about the equilibrium of an economy in terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply is clear to you all. Despite, I would like to suggest you to go through this topic in something better way and in detail from your textbook, and if you have any question and queries, then must discuss with me. Thank you very much.